People at that point, they've made the decision they need to change something.
Men are getting better at talking. Are people getting better at listening?
But it can feel quite daunting.
By now, you need to cry.
If you want to talk about it, we can talk about it.
Most guys don't go to therapy, they just start a podcast.
Actually, you've helped me unlock something there. More of like a chat and explore and see where people are at on their journey.
Got some stuff that I want you to know. Take what you need from it and empower yourself. Pretty much everything comes down to our emotions.
I love that. I love that. Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Jonny with us. Jonny, just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I just want to start by saying it's really great to be here, man. It's really nice, as we've just been talking about, great to be with a fellow podcaster. Very, very tight brief at the beginning. No messing around, so happy about that. Yeah, my name is Jonny Lawrence. I'm better known these days as the self-development coach. I've kind of committed myself to the mission of helping as many people as I can with their self-development. I do work one-to-one with people, but what I'm really transitioning into right now is working one-to-many. I'm delivering self-development education and inspiration and sort of different concepts and ways of doing things through my public speaking, through podcasting and through writing. And what I really do as a coach in self-development, I've been laughed at before because I've described self-development as developing yourself, which is a very useless circular definition. But I think what it is it's helping people transform from where they are now to where they want to be in their future. And I do this by helping, supporting, encouraging, educating people to sort of bridge the gap towards emotional freedom. Hope that's a very nice introduction for you.
Yeah, that is a really great introduction and leads me on quite nicely to one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which I ask a lot of guests to get a better understanding of where they're at on their journey now and how they got there. And that is, can you explain a little bit about your journey up until this point? Like, what was it like growing up and what sort of has led you to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a very, what's the word? Shameless plug. But I just recently made a documentary about this very thing called The Slavery of Addiction. Unfortunately, as a child, I was a witness to domestic violence and a survivor of physical and emotional, psychological abuse and torture. My father tortured me as a child, and I had to watch it happen to my mum and my siblings, and that was very, very tough, and that created a very difficult relationship with my emotions. And as I got older and I started to sort of live on my own and experience romantic relationships, friendship, work relationships, all of those different things, I found it challenging. And I experienced loneliness for the first time when I moved out of the family home. And that led me to the coping mechanism of alcohol, which subsequently led to an addiction to alcohol as I wrestled with the PTSD and wrestled with the difficulty of basically existing with emotions that scared the hell out of me. So that's kind of how my start in life got off. But over time, I think when people experience trauma, when people experience difficult things, if they want to move forward at some point, and I mean this in the most respectful way because I know everyone's situation is different, you have to draw a line in the sand and you have to ask yourself, okay, what next? Not what can I do, what can I do? What do I want? Not what I don't want, what do I want? And you have to start chipping away at figuring that out and moving towards it as best as you can. You'll make some mistakes. You will. You absolutely will. And when the time is right, you will extract knowledge from them. It will always come with a sting. It will always come with a sting, and it will always come with maybe a feeling that you didn't ever want to learn it that way. But sometimes that's the exact way that you were going to learn that thing that you needed to know. I sort of look at myself now as more of an emotional translator, and I help people learn and listen to their emotions and try and understand what they're telling them. Because what I have learned over the time I've been on this planet is that pretty much everything comes down to our emotions. And our relationship with them, our willingness or unwillingness, whether or not we're able to translate what our emotions are really saying to us. Sometimes they're saying things that you don't want to be true, but it is true. And unless you work with the truth, you're gonna struggle a little bit, to be honest.
It's that whole thing of almost tackling, like, as you say, it's getting into that level of acceptance of, okay, here's where I am, here's where I want to go. It's that analysis paralysis of staying where you are, but then also it's that whole thing of, and I know this from being in it myself, where the fuck do you start? That is often what people go. It's like, where do you start? One, how do you start regulating your emotions? How do you start processing what's happened to you in the past, or some a major event that's happened in your life? How do you start that journey? And I think as well, a massive part of that comes into play when we start talking about masculinity as well. There's a big part of the conversation there. It's such a tricky one to navigate. And I think you're completely right of emotions. It's so hard because we often get told to kind of we get told not to lean in too much to our emotions. Oh, shut it off, block it out, or just get on with it. Particularly like in a work scenario, I'm thinking you're like, oh, I really don't enjoy this job that I'm doing, but I've just got to do it. And I've got to shut off that emotion of, I don't like this and I don't want to go to work today. And I think, and then the other big part of it that I always talk about on this pod is so many problems come down to communication issues. So if you look at anything, it's just down to you weren't in a position where you could articulate or communicate what you were struggling with appropriately or effectively. And that also comes into emotional regulation, because if you're at like level 12 of like red mist has descended, you're not going to be able to communicate what's going through your head. And then I think as well as having the people around you to be able to regulate your emotions and effectively communicate them, because I'm in a really fortunate position that particularly my partner, we've got a very much a relationship where we say anything to each other, or also we know each other well enough to be like, okay, that's the face where I'm going to give you 5, I'll be back, I'll let you cool off. And it's creating those relationships, but then it's also allowing people to, as you said, make mistakes. And I think that's such a powerful thing as well of not expecting everyone to be perfect all the time. And then as well, 100%, and as
there's no such thing as
and as
perfect,
well accepting like
doesn't exist.
where you are on the journey of like, you're not going to get it right every time. So if you're beginning that journey of self-development and dealing with a trauma, you're going to have times where you're sitting there thinking, I've not made it anywhere, or you are sitting in the mud of it and you're going, that was a really shitty situation. But then also, if it's that whole one of my favourite things I noticed about you is your reflectance when it comes to your birthday. And I do, funny enough, I do the exact same thing. And that's one big thing I always say to people, look at it in the big picture. Don't look at it in the granular, because you'll becoming a lot further.
There's a couple of things that just what I pick up on there, and it's one of the first things is that word acceptance. It can feel like quite a lot of pressure. And I meet a lot of people that tell me that they're really working on acceptance and they're wrestling with it and they're trying to do it. And I think in most cases that's where the problem lies, because acceptance is not a doing word. There's nothing to be done. If you're trying to do anything, then you're trying to change it so you can accept it. The most difficult thing for most people to do is nothing. It's nothing. It's to not do anything. What can I do to take away this pain? What can I do to change the situation? Nothing. Accept it. And it's just like, it sounds savage, sounds harsh, but you know, and you also said, you know, where do you start? Well, you start where you are, and you allow your emotions to talk to you, to tell you, and you spend a bit of time with them, because the emotion you're having at the beginning is not always what you think it is. Sometimes there's stuff behind that, and you can go deeper with that emotion and you can really find out what it is. And then there's the idea of processing an event as well. And what I've come to realize over time and working with people and working with myself is that, you know, life throws you impossible situations, and we do our best and we make mistakes and things go wrong. Sometimes things go epically wrong, so wrong that they change the course of your life. But the thing about it is that we have to be willing to listen to our emotions, because our emotions are telling us how we feel. It's a bit like an emotional calculator. Yep. Now, a calculator, you put numbers in, and depending on what numbers you put in, the numbers you get out. The calculator is never wrong. It just depends what you're putting in, right? But we're always trying to work with the emotions that we have. And when we're trying to process an event, most often we can't go back in time and change that event. We can't do that. I say most often, we can never do that. So what are we wrestling with? Well, we're wrestling with the difficult emotions that we experience within that event. And say within that event, we experience a significant amount of fear. Every time we experience fear from that moment onwards, we're going to have a challenging time with it. We're going to feel emotionally triggered. And that emotional trigger is going to create probably undesirable behavior, regrettable behavior, and then we're dealing with the behavior, and so on and so on. And I've got many methods and sort of approaches to take with that, but I just wanted to touch upon that because I feel like, we're singing from the same hymn sheet. We definitely see things the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to also just, as I said, allow yourself the opportunity as well. Like you say, you can't go back and change it. One of the common things I get is, like when you hear the story of how I became disabled, everyone's like, do you ever wish that you had a magic pill and you could just change it? And I was like, one, it's not, I know it's a hypothetical question, but it's never going to happen. So there's that. Second of all, the weirdest thing that throws people off is people go, would you hand your disability back? And my answer to that question is often no. And they're like, wait, what? Why? And I'm like, the thing is, one, better the devil you know. Two, I've had so many weird and wonderful opportunities through the fact of being disabled and through the fact of the challenges and everything else that comes with it. So I always comedify it a bit and say, if I was able-bodied, I'd probably tried to be a footballer, failed miserably, and ended up working in finance. That would have probably been my trajectory. but it's true. Funny, honestly, I come from a massive football family. Would have loved to have become a professional. Probably wouldn't have made it, and then would have. Yeah, it's just but then and it's also those big challenges put you on sort of a trajectory. Some of the big things, like you said, they'll have such an effect on your life where they'll completely change the direction, and it's almost about leaning into that. And that's something I battle with as well. Of everyone gets analysis paralysis and also imposter syndrome and all the things that come with it, but it's also gradual. Everyone's like, I need to be great at this all the time. No, just get better at it. Just slightly improve every day, or I often say move the weight a little bit every day, and you'll eventually go, shit, I've come quite a long way here.
Yeah, it's amazing how far you can come just from gradually chipping away at something and being realistic and knowing when to stop as well. Yeah. Knowing when to take a break and to rest. I'm going through a period of that at the moment. My body's been telling me for a little while that I need to take a break, and I've been like, just one more week. And now my body's like, no, now. so that's what's going on. And luckily it's Christmas and the kids are just broken up, so I'll be able to do all that, which would be lovely.
And I also wanted to dive in because obviously a lot of the work you do is around managing emotions, and I wanted to get you to, obviously I brought up briefly there about some of the struggles that men go through when it comes to managing emotions, because there's the whole alpha complex and the wanting to remain strong and also not wanting to come across as weak. How have you struggled with that at all? And if so, how have you managed it? And then also when you're talking to people, working with people, what do you say to them? Particularly, I think it's so hard for men sometimes because there's the whole thing of it's changing direction and we want to talk more, but then also there's almost a part of us that wants to maintain that alpha, I'm going to get on with it, I'm going to be fine. How do you bridge the gap? Because I think there's health in both, and that's a big part of the conversation I often bring up of there's toxic masculinity and there's also just masculinity, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when you go too much of an extreme.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, personally, I think that men are improving when it comes to talking. I think that is happening. I think there's definitely been an awareness, even if you used one measure such as social media, a lot more men are talking about some of their mental health struggles, which are helping other men see that they are the same as, and that's helpful. But I think really the biggest problem is the catch up part, is that yes, men are getting better at talking, but are people getting better at listening?
Yeah.
It's really difficult when you have using the language you did, when you have like a man's man, an alpha male who's very emotional, but it's usually very stoic and very strong and very silent and very together, and putting all of these traits across all of the time, trying to be or being that alpha male. When they become emotional and vulnerable, that makes people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes people feel really uncomfortable. And if that person who's listening doesn't deal with that situation in a empathetic and compassionate way, that person will have just learned never do that again. Never ever do that again.
Yeah.
And I think women are typically better communicators because they typically have more experience of talking over long periods of time with women, other women. But men are only just learning the language. Now, when we start talking about mental health, there is a language. Sometimes people don't know what words to use, and sometimes their words come out recklessly or wrong, and they feel more embarrassed, and they say things they don't quite mean because they're not used to doing it. If you actually think of it like a language, when you're first using the language, you can very easily say things wrong and offend people and get things wrong. And I think that's kind of what's happening with men. It's a very clunky, very ugly looking situation when a man is trying to tell somebody, whether it's male or female, how they feel. And then there's all the natural reactions amongst other men of mugging each other off and trying to dissipate that uncomfortable feeling with humor and all of those things. And it's just a massive stirring pot of difficult situations. So that's kind of my take on it, really.
No, I completely agree. It's that whole thing of, I always say, where you how do I articulate this? It's the language is so important, but then also, as I've said earlier, you have to allow people to make mistakes. Like, I always play it in the context of the one I'm familiar to, in terms of when you talk about disability. There's a lot of, do I call him a guy in a wheelchair? Do I call him this? Do I call him that? It's about allowing them the space to go, okay, we're going to get the terminology completely wrong here, but I can understand the intent. And it's about understanding the intent behind it as well, because then you can manage the situation effectively. If you know, like, obviously playing it in the context of disability, you know if there's malice behind something, or if you know that someone just doesn't know the right terminology to use. There's a very clear, like, it's a dead obvious situation. And it's a similar thing when you talk about discussing mental health when it comes to men. It's like, yes, we may not know the terminology, but it's allowing people to have the space just to bring it up and have a space where, okay, this is something, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. And it's a comfortable space. But then also, I think, as well as men, and to be honest, this is me all over as well, is we always want to fix. So, like, if my mate comes to me and goes, bro, I'm really struggling with this thing, my instinct is to go, have you tried this? Try this, do this. Why don't you speak to this person? When actually sometimes it's just, as I'm sure you've come across with Simon Sinek, of like, just sit there and just listen. And like you said, we're not very good at it.
Not very well practiced, I would say. Not very well practiced, yeah.
And I think a lot of us default to, I'm nervous, I don't know what to do, I'll make a joke. That's normally default position. And I think it's so hard. And I think, have you seen with the groups that you've worked with and the clients that you've worked with, have you seen it's also more with the younger generation, or have you seen it more with the older generation?
What do you mean?
In terms of like the reluctance to talk about mental health, because I think it's weirdly in my life at the moment, it seems like it's a very split thing. Like, you got some people, the older generation, they're like, we talk about mental health, this is a part of the conversation. Then you got the other part of them that's like, stiff upper lip and just get on with it. And then you've got the other side of the younger generation going, again, it's that whole thing of, I don't know whether this is a space where we can talk about it. Also, a lot of the time in that situation, people are still trying to find themselves. So they don't know, can I say it in this space? Am I going to be judged for it? That's the way I kind of see it. But then I'm intrigued as well, because I think so many young people, I'm only 25, but when I look at 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, there's so many young men struggling with their mental health, and women. But I feel like there's I think there's just too much information flying around, to be honest.
That's a hard one. I think it's a generational thing, and I think that what I mean by that is the young people will more or less mimic the older people in their life. They will be the examples of how to be a man, or what masculinity looks like, or what being male looks like. And they will mimic that, never really being able or willing to question whether it's the right way or not. You know, so it's not until, generally for most men, in my experience, it's when they meet the right woman in their life who starts to nurture that out of them a little bit more, or maybe they had that nurturing mother that did that, or sister, or somebody like that. You know, I get a lot of sisters reaching out to me about their brothers. That happens a lot, you know. So yeah, and I have to say the same thing. You know, look, this is not going to work unless your brother is willing.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be willing and ready, because he's not going to be open to it. As a coach, I do not look at it as my job to have answers for anybody. I just don't think that's the right way to do things. I think most people, when they present you with the problems that they're having with, they also know the solutions, but it's the fear, it's the awkwardness, it's the lack of confidence, it's the lots of different reasons why they're not moving forward. It's generally not that they don't have solutions. They have solutions. They just either don't know which one it is, or they're scared of different results and all of the different things. And that's where I give them a platform to talk out loud so they can hear themselves for the first time and start to make sense. Human beings, psychology has taught us that human beings organize their mind through conversation. You've just got to let them do it. Yeah. You've just got to let them do it. You've just got to sit there and watch them. And the only thing I might do is there's this thing called spiraling, where people spiral and they use anxiety to make the problem bigger by catastrophizing and using all of these things that haven't happened and may not happen to make the problem bigger. But spiraling can go the other direction, and you can spiral inwards towards the solution, where you start to problem solve and you start to hear things out loud and go, actually, that's never going to happen. And if you just let them do it, they will fix it for themselves. They will sort it for themselves. The only time I interrupt is when I see them spiraling outwards. And even then, I'm not going to tell them they're doing it wrong. Yeah. I'm just going to say, well, that hasn't happened yet. How helpful is that? Let's focus on the things that are happening. Get them back in the right direction. What's happening? What is the situation? What is the truth of it? And how can we move forward? You know, that's generally the premise.
One of the things I always get drilled into by my therapist is pick a path. Stop coming up with 1,200 paths. Pick one, stick to it.
Singularity of focus, they call that.
It's more, as you say, prime example. I always do this to show that, like, I, as someone that runs this podcast, I'm not infallible, and it gives a real world example of, like, I am notorious for, I will come up with 1,200 different solutions or 1,200 reasons why something's going to go wrong before going, I'll go for that one. So one of the big things that's been drilled into me recently is just pick one, see where it goes. Because if you sit here, nothing's going to change.
Explore, be curious. I mean, if I was to put it into a concise statement, I suppose what you're doing when a friend comes to you with a problem is you are providing the opportunity for them to explore the solutions. As soon as you give them what you think is a solution, you're using your belief systems, your value systems, your emotional experiences to tell them what to do. And if they do what you do, it's a loss situation, because if it works out for the best, they have just learned that the only way to move forward in life is to go and ask Jonny. Yeah. If it doesn't work out for the best, then they have to live with the consequences of your decisions. So either way,
that's a lot of pressure for Jonny to hold.
Yeah, go on. So that's why I don't play. I just get people to explore things, and I give them the respect and the confidence that I believe and know most of the time that they have the solutions. And when they start to back away from a solution, I'm curious about that. And I say, you know, you keep talking about these other three solutions, but there's that fourth one that you just seem to be avoiding. Is there a reason for that? You know, and then we start to get an understanding of what that is. It's usually because they're terrified, or it might be the right solution. They just don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's that whole thing of avoidance. You're going, no, thank you. What about what led you to what you do now, though? Like from listening to your story, as someone outside looking in and making assumptions, you wouldn't assume that you'd go into, do you know what? I'm going to be a self-development coach. What was the journey of because I love hearing people who've transitioned careers or gone on a path that's really interesting, and I love hearing how people get there because I think it gives people perspective that might feel stuck.
Yeah, stuck's a good word, man, because I think that's generally when people come to me, they babble for like 15, 20 minutes and then they finish up with the same statement most times, and as I just feel stuck. And for me, my journey was that obviously, I mean, I'd always been a listener. I'd always been a problem solver. I'd always been somebody that likes to help people. I sat with my mum from probably too young of an age, trying to help her with some of the things that she was going through, financial issues, obviously domestic violence and various other things. So it was always in me. It was always kind of my training, you know? And then, I suppose I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself, growing up. It wasn't shown to me. It wasn't, encouraged in any way. And I became a professional wrestler very early on, which is a random fact that people often find amusing. But I grew up watching professional wrestling on TV.
Yeah.
It was an escape for me. I fell in love with all of the larger than life characters, music, storylines, all of that stuff. And then when I was old enough, I gave it a go, and I lasted quite a while in it until I met a lady that's now my wife, and I fell in love, and that was the end of that. And I decided I needed the career, so I knew I liked helping people. I didn't have the confidence to become a psychologist or coach at that time, so I went into personal training, and I helped people that way. And it wasn't until a bit later in life. See, sometimes people, I'd always been a coach, because people come to me, especially women, unfortunately, and they would say, I want to lose weight. And I would say, like, hey, what's driving your decision to lose weight? And they would say to me, I hate myself. And I say, look, you know, what's really important, what's going to really help on those difficult days is your motivation. Your motivation is the reason why you're doing something. And if the reason why you're doing this is because you hate yourself, when it gets really hard and you need to dip into that bag of motivation, it's not going to help you. You know, we have to learn. I'm not going to ask you to love yourself. If you've been practicing self-loathing for 20 years, it's probably a bit much to ask you to love yourself. But how about we get to know yourself? Let's get to like yourself. Let's do these things first. Let's respect ourselves enough to make these changes. And quite often what I discovered was that people would come to me and say, Jonny, I'm really unhappy because I'm overweight. And then I would just be curious, and I'd be like, but is it that, or are you overweight because you're unhappy? Is your weight gain a symptom of your unhappiness? And I'd always looked into the psychology, and it wasn't until I got to a significant birthday and I was looking through reviews, and I'd had loads of reviews, and I'd helped lots of people lose weight and get stronger and beat diabetes and heart stuff as well. And none of them said anything about that. They all said in their reviews, Jonny's helped me with my relationships. Jonny's helped me with my confidence. Jonny's helped me with this. And I was just like, this is, because it was getting a bit stale for me. I felt like, I don't know, not a fraud, but I felt like when I was in the gym, doing a squat, doing a press up, doing a chin up or a bench press, it didn't light me up, man. I was more interested in people's lives and what's going on and listening. So I started to explore coaching, and then one thing led to another. And I never intended to become the self-development coach. The universe has very much forced me into that situation. And I happily take that role. I'm stepping into it a lot more now, because I've come to accept that I'm an articulate person. I've been through a lot of things. I've also educated myself to the highest level I can at this stage in my life. And when I talk, it helps. You know, it helps people.
And it's also, it comes across as well, because it's that thing of like, that shows a natural skill. But then one of the other things I want to point out is not many people would have the foresight or like the zoom out technique of, I got all these reviews. Do you know what's one weird common thread? This. And then, but that, like, I love that idea, because I'm like, I would never look at something and go, that's a really interesting outcome of it. I don't know why. I just wouldn't, like, I think you'd be surprised. I think when you're searching for something, if you're content, you probably wouldn't do that. But when you're searching for something, when something doesn't feel right and you're finally willing to put a bit of focus and attention towards it,
you'll be surprised what you notice. You really
and also,
will.
like, what did you? So obviously, coming to the conclusion, right? I actually like just getting to know people, what they're struggling with, and how I can support them. What then made what? How was the journey from okay, I'm gonna make this decision to then going down the route of okay, I'm gonna train myself in this area to then allow myself to help other people? Because I think the reason I asked that question is because so many people that want to transition and change their life often get stuck in this whole, oh my god, I've got to retrain, oh my god, I've got to do this, oh my god, I've got to do all these things. How was that journey for you? Obviously, a lot of people at that point, they've made the decision they need to change something, but it can feel quite daunting jumping into something, particularly, obviously, you had already had the evidence that you had a good chance that you were quite good at it. So, but what was that journey like of, okay, I'm going to go into this direction and see where it goes?
I'm very fortunate in some ways. I have a very unique relationship with fear. I spent a very early part of my life believing that I was a fear and weak and fearful person, only to find out later in life that you can't be brave, which is what's needed in order to be successful. To do hard things, you need to be brave, because you can't be brave without being scared. So whenever I feel fear, I start to get curious about it, because it usually means something. It usually means I shouldn't be there, or I am exactly where I need to be, you know? And I think that's pretty obvious. It's usually obvious. So I decided that I would just go with the flow. And I started looking into different training providers. And then I came across this video, and this guy was on there who unfortunately is no longer with us anymore. But he was talking about coaching. And he was describing what I do. And I was just like, this is nuts. And the thing about coaching is, really, I don't know how many people realize this, but it's an unregulated industry. You don't actually have to have a certification. In fact, you can't be a qualified coach. You can be a certified coach, but you can't be qualified because there is no sort of formal qualification needed. So really, it's up to the integrity of the person to get the qualifications. And you can go online and you can get a £30 qualification, and that's fine. I'm not rubbishing it. You know, it depends on your integrity, and it depends on your depth of knowledge and how much you're willing to learn on your own. But you can also go out and you can spend thousands and thousands of pounds on courses. Now, some of those courses for thousands of pounds are worth it. Some of them aren't. And it's a real minefield. So for me, I went with a company called the Coaching Academy, and I never looked back because I made some great friends. I found some really great mentors, and I've been encouraged the whole way through. Still to this day, I'm encouraged by one person in particular at the Coaching Academy. And, you know, I also at the same time started a podcast. My reason for starting a podcast was because I wanted to gain knowledge from people that were basically really expensive. And if I wanted to spend time with them, I had to pay them like £300 an hour. Or if I had a podcast to do it for free. That. So I was like, cool, let's do that. So I was just like, cool. So I went on and I just asked all the same questions I would have done if I took them out for dinner or I'd gone into their consultation room. And it turned out that people wanted to know the answers to those questions too. So when I eventually started a podcast, even though I'd had about 6 or 7 interviews in the bank and I hadn't done anything with them, and that again was happenstance. I was at a photo shoot with a friend who was opening a gym, and he wanted some bodies to do some stuff in the gym. And one of the guys that was there was a podcast producer. And I'm like, wow, what's the chances? Yeah. So we got chatting, and his name was Charlie. And he said to me, hey, man, let me help you with that. So we did that, and that was a hell of a ride. I got to meet lots of great people. And then from that point, a couple of people said, hey, you know, you'd make a good speaker. Do you want to come and speak at this event? Do you want to come and do that? And then I started realizing that I can educate people on the things that I'd learned. I'd realized that, you know, not only have I learned things that are formally psychology or in self-development books, I've also started to be brave enough to apply my own concepts and my own sort of ways of doing things. And they've been successful and they make sense to people. And I suppose what I'm endeavoring to do in self-development is it's become such a crazy industry where there's lots of people telling you that you have to do it this way, and there's gurus and there's mentors and there's all this confusing stuff. And all I'm trying to do now is empower people to realize that I don't have any answers for you, but I've got some stuff that I want you to know. Take what you need from it and empower yourself and move forward. Like, it's self-development that makes sense. Yeah. It's not, I'm not, when people are lost and they're finding life hard, the last thing they need is more stuff to do. They're looking for some ways to make life a bit easier, and I've found some. So I think it's helpful, and I hope it is.
I love that, and also it's so nice as well, because I think sometimes in the self-development space, and I say this in the nicest way possible, it can often feel quite like fluffy. It almost feels like you say, it's that whole thing of it feels like everyone's a coach. That's what it's better at. So everyone's a coach in some stretch of it. And what's really nice with you is so much of your story links back to how you can help people, because it's that whole thing of, you've got so much evidence from the evidence that, as I say, the universe just gave you, and was like, no, Jonny's pretty good at this shit, other than, oh no, I'm just gonna go be a coach because I can do it remotely, and that's why. And I think it's so important to have, because I think you said in a piece that you did, it's like being more authentically, like, I think we're moving away from having it be quite a formal space of like, oh, I'm going to help you with this thing, and more of like a chat and explore and see where people are at on their journey, because then you get more out of people. If you're quite formal and like, oh, very serious, people aren't going to want to open with you. And I think that's one of your massive strengths, is you're very personable.
As is yours, to be fair. Like, you're very much like that. I mean, we're having a great time, having a good conversation. You're easy to talk to. And I feel the same way about you, man. I totally resonate with that.
And it's interesting, because one of the other things that I think we relate on was, I've always said that I've got a really good, I like to think I've got a good emotional intelligence radar. Because one of the things, and it was one of the things I really pulled out of your story, of understanding how people are feeling, but also because of the situations we find ourselves in, you develop that skill. So like, the reason I've developed that skill is because automatically when someone meets me, there's the whole panic of, oh my God, guy in a wheelchair, how do I interact with this person? Or, oh, I don't know what to do with them. Or it's the whole thing of like inappropriate jokes or whatever it is. And then I adapt which some people say is a negative, I adapt my behaviour to support that. So for example, if I've got an individual that's very nervous around disability, I will often open up with a disability joke that's completely unhinged, purely for the fact of, look, it's not the elephant in the room. We can talk about it. It's fine.
It's like a permission, isn't it, to relax? It's like permission to relax. And I totally get that, because and I don't think it's a negative. I think it's a negative if you can't choose to do it. If you feel compelled to do it, then maybe it is a negative. Maybe there's something there. But I think if it's an active choice, you're choosing to diffuse a certain tension, I think that shows an incredible level of emotional intelligence, personally.
I completely agree, because I think as well, the other thing, because the often rebuttal to that is like, but why should you have to adapt your behaviour for someone else? But I always think you'll always have a better interaction with someone if both individuals are comfortable. Even if the topic that you're covering is a bit sensitive or a bit touchy or a bit like, oh, okay, this is awkward. If both people in the room understand that, okay, this is a bit of a tricky subject, but there's a mutual respect for each other, and there's a mutual like, look, we're both here just trying to learn, or both here just trying to sort out a problem, rather than attacking someone for their not even their beliefs, but they're like where they are in their life. Because I always say, you only know what you know, so you can't judge someone on that. So that's where I often use emotional intelligence, because I feel like I do, is because I'm often in rooms where people aren't exposed to disability, so they don't know how to act around me. So I kind of have to mould them and kind of guide them through that. But I think it was, and it's a big thing that I wanted to speak to you about, which is like your views on emotional intelligence, because it came through in some of the work that you do and the content you create, of like, it's not often something I bring up, and it's often something I think about, because I often feel like I am always like there's a default to like managing situations.
I think that comes with trauma. That hypervigilance of always checking all scenarios all the time and making sure that everything and everyone is where they need to be, and everything is kind of safe, you know? When you've been through something that's made you feel so unsafe and terrifying, whether you like it or not, there's always going to be a little part of you that's like the world's worst like safety checker. It's just like checking us around us all the time, you know? So I get that.
So true. It's so true. And I think for me, it's interesting because I wouldn't say that there's ever been a stage where I've ever been fearful. I think mine's more when I was younger, seeking acceptance because I knew I was different. So I knew I was different. So I would seek the like, okay, how can I manage the situation? So not even because people go like, oh, but you were then just trying to please everyone. My thing was always, I don't mind dealing with confrontation, but if it doesn't have to happen, I'm not going to let it happen unless it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to go home feeling like shit. So like something might be said and I'm thinking, right, okay, I could be really picky and pick up on that, or I can let it slide and bring it into the conversation and explain why it's a problem, X, Y, Z, and that would often be my approach. But I think that does come from the whole, like, as they being different and wanting to be liked, and obviously as well as that, I think actually you've helped me unlock something there. Maybe it was to do with the fact of never knowing whether I was going to need help from that person. So I was always like, look, let's keep them sweet because I never know whether I'm going to be stuck somewhere and need a hand.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think if there's one thing that comes across from you is that you're a good person, man. And I think that you're obviously, maybe not formally, but you're a helper. Like, podcasters are helpers. We're craving knowledge. We want to know things, or we want to share things. I think that's kind of the whole premise of a podcast, isn't it? We're on a journey, and there's a joke I saw, a meme the other day, and it said, most guys don't go to therapy, they just start a podcast. And I thought that's quite funny because it's exactly what I did. So it made it quite amusing. But I think what you stumbled upon there is, and this is an unexplored thought, so stand by, but is the idea that, like, we as a species are becoming more self-obsessed. And I think that comes, and that's perpetuated by social media. The idea that we must always think about ourselves first. And I don't think that's a very human and very naturally human trait. I think we're kind of designed to consider each other a lot more than we realize. And I think that the idea that we should only think about how we feel and how things should be for us, you know, like you just said then, people say to you, why should you change yourself for other people? Well, I don't think you're changing yourself. I think what you're doing is you're considering the other person's side of the story. What you've done is you've done such an accelerated process is that you've understood through some sort of microaggression, micro expression, something has told you that this person isn't comfortable, and you kind of know why. So you found a way to make them comfortable. What you've done is you've taken the opportunity to understand how the other person feels, like really understand how they feel, so that you can make things as pleasant as possible for them. What's wrong with that? Why must you force somebody to understand something they don't understand? That's like me demanding right now that you speak a language that you can't speak. Yeah. It doesn't matter how much I want you to. It doesn't matter how much I demand it. You can't do it. So therefore, I'm giving you the conflict pointlessly. It doesn't have to be there, you know, and you're choosing not to do that. And I think that's what a good person does. I don't think that's a problem. And I think the people that say that to you, not knowing who they are, so I'm going to be careful who that is, but maybe that's their problem, not yours, perhaps.
I mean, I think you're right. I think it's that whole thing of like, it's also, people are on different parts of their journey. Like for me, I'm very comfortable I'm happy to, for want of a better, manage situations because, as I say, my belief is that way you have a better interaction, and that way you're also going to learn more from someone because they're going to be comfortable around you. Whereas if you're aggressive or anything like that, they're going to lock up, and then it's like makes that whole interaction very like one way and quite rigid. Whereas I always think like I would rather understand someone. I'm notorious. Again, probably why you started a podcast. I loved hearing people's stories. So like, I'm notorious for people going like, why does Charlie disappear to the bar? And then he comes back with like, he's made a new friend. He's got a new story to tell us.
Love
like,
that.
It's just, I just love hearing people's different perspectives. And I think there's so much power in that. And the only way you do that is, one of my favorite things again, good communication. And to be a good communicator, you've also got to have a level of emotional intelligence to manage a situation. But I think it's an undervalued skill. And I think oftentimes it's often that belief of like, why should you adapt for someone else?
It's the wrong question. You know, I just don't. Why should you adapt for someone else is the wrong question. I think most why questions, not all, but most why questions are the wrong question. I think what questions are interesting. Why questions are introspective questions. They're blame questions. Why ends up with someone getting blamed usually. You know, whereas what is more exploratory, is more like, oh yeah, what is that about?
Yeah.
You know, when I think what, I think someone with an inquisitive face and a big question mark above their head, like what's going on here, you know?
Yeah.
And they're looking around and they're searching and they're being curious. Whereas why is just another way of saying it's your fault. You know, it's your fault. Well, in most cases, not all cases, obviously you gotta look for why it can be used in different ways, you know. But yeah, I think asking why should you change is the wrong question. I don't know what the right one would be. What's to be gained from changing?
Yeah. I mean, you're completely right. I've just thought about like the whole thing of, as soon as you say someone's made a mistake, as soon as you go, why did this happen? It sounds so much more aggressive than what happened here. Like,
it's not leading to a solution. Why in those scenarios? Why is not leading to a solution? It's leading to blame, and blame will keep you trapped, because blame will lead to resentment, will lead to anger, will lead to a lot of unpleasant, unnecessary emotions. Whereas what straight away I suppose it's the difference between why being okay, you're on your own, and what being like, let's fix this together. You know, let's explore this together. Let's find a solution. You're telling that person, all I'm interested in right now is finding a solution. You know, because we all make mistakes. It's like when somebody cuts you up on the road. It's like, and they bib and they get crazy, and you cut someone up on the road and they bib. It's like, listen, have you never made a mistake? I hope I never see you cut anyone up, because everybody has lapses of judgment. Everyone makes mistakes. It's just being human, you know.
100%. And I think, how would you say someone can develop their emotional intelligence?
I think it starts with, for me anyway, and this is just, everything's just my opinion or something I've learned, but it's about practicing identifying the emotions you are experiencing. Now, what I mean by that, a really easy one, is someone will say to me, I'm angry. And I'll say, okay. So they want to be angry. I don't know if you've ever tried to rationalize or have a constructive conversation with an angry person. It generally doesn't go that well. It's a very destructive emotion. It's a necessary emotion. I'm not saying it's a bad emotion or it's a wrong emotion. I'm saying it's not the emotion that's easy to work with. So, okay, how do we find out what the right emotion is? How do we find out what the emotion that you're really experiencing is? Okay, what are you angry about? And then they go, oh, okay, this person said this to me and it made me feel like crap. Okay, so, and actually you might be feeling inadequate. Or something happened and you might be feeling disappointed. Or something happened and you might be feeling scared. That's the real emotion. That's the primary emotion. The secondary emotion is an emotion about an emotion. The primary emotion is an emotion about an event. Once we start trying to process the emotions about events, which we won't want to do because they'll be really horrible emotions that we won't want anything to do with. Like, no person in this world wants to feel inadequate. No one. No one wants to be scared. No one wants to be disappointed. They're impossible feeling emotions. Hopelessness, helplessness. All of these emotions are horrid and we don't want anything to do with them. But if we're going to process emotions, we're going to have to look at those things. And most of the time, unfortunately, the solution is acceptance, which no one wants to do because no one gets to throw stuff or be angry. Because that's the other thing about anger, is it feels productive.
Yeah.
It feels like a productive emotion. It feels like you can do stuff, like you've got autonomy, that you're empowered, but you're not. you're basically making the problem worse. That's what you're doing, you know? And it's not your fault, and I'm not pointing fingers or saying you're doing anything wrong. It's a very natural emotion, but as soon as you can get away from that, the better. And then I think the second thing is to be curious when dealing with other people. So when you're dealing with other people, come at it with curiosity, like a child. Ask questions. Try to really understand how the other person is feeling. And I mean that when you ask a question, it's not like you're not trying to be right. Don't worry about being right. Worry about what's true, because what's true will always be true, and it will be stable and reliable. Ask questions to understand. Okay, actually, how would I have dealt with this situation? What would I have done in that situation? Oh, I can really understand. You were in a real bind there, and it was a difficult decision to make. You know, really trying to understand that. First of all, you will have a bit more compassion. Second of all, that person will be more likely, much like what you said about earlier, they're more likely to drop the defense and start working with you instead of against you. As soon as you come at somebody with the finger pointing and the blame, and they know and they can tell by your face and all them different things that this is going to be a battle, they're going to put their armor on and you're not going to get past it. So really, for emotional intelligence, I think it's about trying to identify the emotion that you're experiencing, be curious with other people, try to understand their perspective, and try not to fall into the trap of wanting to be right. Doesn't get you anywhere. All right, how often with your partner has being right worked out for you? Doesn't go well, does it?
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very true. Or it's the whole thing of like, I think one of the things I've said before is like picking your battles of like, is it worth the battle? No. I'm gonna. Yep. You're right. It's fine. But it's so true. I think there's so much power in zooming out as well. And it's something I've tried to practice more recently, of like I say, with that whole picking your battles thing, of like zooming out and, like you say, putting myself in the other person's shoes and going, if this scenario happened to me, how would I feel about it and how would I react to it? Because the other thing I'd caveat that with, as much as I am, I'd like to think I've got good emotional intelligence, the other thing I am is a redhead. Do you know what comes with that? A temper that can cause me to fly off if I really want to. And that's also another thing where I've had to learn how to manage it. Like, I can feel it coming. I can feel often the dead giveaway for me is the red ears and the red face. That's the dead giveaway. But then, like, it's about managing the situation and going, okay, is this worth getting this worked up about? Or is it worth just taking a breather? Or as my dad likes to do, I've got to walk away.
Yeah, well, mate, sometimes that is the solution, is to walk away. And I think people want those situations to be perfect and to be dealt with brilliantly. In most cases, those situations are just clunky and just really uncomfortable. They really are. I've got this analogy of, like, quite often when people reach some levels of anger, it's an emotional trigger, right? Someone's said something in a certain way, and you've applied meaning that perhaps was there, but most likely wasn't, you know? Or someone's done something and you feel disrespected in some way, or something like that that's really triggered you. And I think that comes down to the experiences of the past, I think. And I've got this analogy of a pothole. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but I say emotion triggers are like potholes, right? So you wake up in the morning, you get in your car, and you've got your coffee in your hand, you've got your tunes on, you've got a nice clear day, nice sunny day, nice clear road, you're driving along, everything is okay, you are okay. And you're driving your car and you hit a pothole. And you become completely out of control of the vehicle. And it doesn't matter what pedals you push or which way you turn the steering wheel or anything that you do, you are out of control and you're spiraling towards a tree. At some point, you impact the tree, things get damaged, people get hurt, and you're living in chaos. That is an emotional trigger, you know? Mm-hmm. So what can we do about it? Well, we can get better at spotting potholes. We can get better at spotting potholes. When we approach them potholes, we can slow down. When we approach those potholes, we can drive around them. We can even fill them in at some point, you know? And the equivalent of that is waking up in the morning, you're doing well, everything's okay, and you go to the loo, you go on social media, or you read a message or an email, and you're immediately activated. And then you start taking it out on your partner or anyone else that's around, and you start texting people things that you're going to regret later, and it's just all gone to pot. And I've had people that said to me, you know, oh, in the spiritual people, which I'm a spiritual person, but they've said to me, oh, in those moments, I like to pretend that I've got a little force field around me and nothing can penetrate me. Okay, cool. If that works for you, that's amazing. Most people that doesn't work for. And if you use my analogy of driving a car, if you're spiraling towards a tree, how does your force field hold up then?
Yeah.
It just doesn't, you know. So it's about really preparing. It's like we all know who the people are in our lives that trigger us, and the real question is, do we need to spend time with them? And if we do, can we control how we do that? Can we limit our interactions? You know, don't send a voice note, don't call them, send a text message that can be more considered and more thought through. You know, there's always ways to deal with people, but the first step to that is always awareness. We have to become aware of our triggers. We have to become aware of the things that make us angry. We have to become aware of the people, places, and things in our environment that trigger us. And then when we are aware of what those things are, and the only way we're going to find them out is by experiencing the trigger, we can then put things in place. And then I suppose the other part to that as well is that sometimes you just lose your rag and you have to apologize. And you have to own it. You have to go, listen, I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I shouldn't have said those things and done those things. I'm really sorry. There's not a lot more you can do at that point. You've messed up. Yeah. You know, and an apology goes a long way, I think.
And I think that has massive power as well, because if you can get yourself to a point of realizing, okay, like bringing my partner into it, I so many times have I gone off on one with Gina, and then I've sat there for 5 minutes and gone, well, that was fucking stupid. Sorry.
No, we all do it. I'll probably do it tonight.
But then it's having the power to be like, my bad, got wrapped up in my own head there. But it's interesting. I want to pick on something really random that you said earlier about the voice note thing. I actually think it's the opposite way around with voice notes. I would say, to get a point across, I would say you're better using a voice note. And the reason for that, and I take your point of because you're completely right. You get a chance to sit and really think about what you want to say. But you can express so much more emotion through a voice note.
The tonality, yeah. Totally agree.
Because one of my big things I see, particularly at work all the time, is people take emails so like they forget to consider it's just the way it's come across. It wasn't the way it was intended. It's just the way you've read it, and
it's the way exactly that. It's the way you've read it. It's your biases. It's your meanings that you've applied to it. It's your mood that you're in at the time. It's all those things.
And I think there's so much power as well of. Again, it's the communication thing of being able to articulate, and also it's again giving people the space to say, look, you've had a bad day and you might be a bit fiery today, or something bad has happened at work, and there's nothing wrong with that, because I think as well, striving for this whole ability to I never have a bad day at work. Like I never let my work life or something happen at work or something that happened throughout my day affect the rest of my day. That sounds realistic. We all know that something
isn't realistic at all. No.
So it's as I say, for me it's just that zooming out. I love that word of like just zoom out and accept that like it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen every now and again.
Yeah.
This whole idea that you're never gonna argue with anyone. Or no, it's
not realistic. You're absolutely right, and I think another way to say that as well is about really considering the situation. And I think what it comes down to is awareness. Like you said a couple of times now, like communication is the key. The way that we communicate, the words that we use, the methods that we take. Some people might feel really insulted to receive a text message. They might want to hear your voice. However, if you are furious at somebody, you might want to pick your timing when it comes to sending them a message, because that tonality will come across whether you like it or not. You know, so
actually, I'm going to pick on a point if you don't mind me asking, because I think it's also would help sort of people understand it, of like managing your emotions. How did you manage your? Obviously, this is back at the beginning of part of your story. How did you manage your emotions when all the struggles with domestic violence were happening earlier in life? Because I'm thinking of it from my understanding of with assumption, which is as anyone, you'd be pissed. I don't know how I would manage my, like, I'd be angry, wouldn't know what to do, but then I would imagine you just felt stuck. But then how did you process that as a young man growing up? Because I can imagine your instinct is protect, but then also, yeah, how I feel like that it's such an interesting thing to dive into if you're happy to talk about it.
Of course. No, I mean, as an archetype, I am a protector. I do protect, and it warmed my heart when my sons said to me once that they were doing a school project, and it was like pointing out qualities of your parents, and they said my dad protects us, keeps us safe, and I was like, I love that, you know. But I suppose early on, my sort of way of dealing with disassociation. I disassociated from the situation, and it was interesting when I went through my therapeutic journey. I remember there was one particular session where I came home crying, and I just cried and cried and cried, like years of tears. I've always had a very difficult relationship with crying because my dad used to hit me till I cried and then hit me till I stopped. So there was obviously a difficult relationship that was created in that moment with tears. So I was crying on my wife's lap, and I said to her, I can't believe this is all about my father. And she was like, really? Like, really? After everything you've told me? I think that's obvious. But this is the thing. It wasn't to me. Because how do you know anything different when you're growing up? When you grow up in a certain environment, you just think this is the way things are. And you ignore all of the cues that your life is different to other people because you don't want to look there. You don't want to find out what's in that direction. And yeah, as you say, once I started to explore it, I did feel anger. I felt anger towards my mother at one point, which was difficult for me and what's helped with that is realizing that my mum was no different to us. She was just a kid trapped in the same situation too. But here's the thing. Emotions are not wrong. They're not wrong. You know, again, going back to the calculator thing, you might have put in the wrong information, but the emotions are not wrong. It's not wrong to be angry. In fact, anger is very healthy. And what I have learned to do is when I am angry and it's not the appropriate time to have that anger, I will park that anger and I will revisit it later. And what I do is I personally, and this is just the way I do things, I go into my gym and I put the boxing bag up and I just go hell for leather on the bag. You know, and I scream at it and I say all sorts of things at it and I get it out there and it gets to the point where it gets so silly that I start laughing. And I know that I've done it. I've processed the anger. I'll ask the anger, what do you want from me? Because there's one thing that I can tell you now, you never meet an angry, confused person. Yeah. People often know why they are angry or what's made them angry, you know. So I communicate with the anger and I process it that way. Another way to do it is to write a letter. You don't have to give it to the person, but you can write a letter and get all your thoughts out. You can scream into a pillow. That's a really effective way to get it done. There is ranting to a friend, ringing up that friend who's not going to try and give you advice, fix it, guilt you, tell you shouldn't feel that way. He's just going to listen, might even chuckle a little bit, you know, all of those things, you know. One of those friends where you can use all the swear words, every single one, So the trick is to have that anger. So for me, I did have anger, and coincidentally, that's when the professional wrestling started. And to be a professional wrestler, the irony is you have to learn to fight first. So I learned to fight, and I got a lot of my anger out, in that process, and I learned a lot. And funny enough, once you learn to fight, you don't feel the urge to do it anymore, which is interesting. You don't walk around an angry teenager wanting to fight everybody because you don't need that anymore. You've kind of got that thing that you're looking for. So for me it was about processing anger, and ultimately it comes down to that acceptance. And here's the thing about acceptance is, by accepting, you're not forgiving anybody. You're not saying that you like the situation and that the situation's okay. You are only saying that you accept that it happens, and what that gives you is the ability to then move on. And what does moving on mean? Moving on means focusing on something else, anything else but that. just choosing to focus on having a happy relationship, choosing to focus on being a good parent, choosing to focus on your career, choosing to focus on anything else but obsessing over the thing that has happened, you know, and hopefully is no longer happening. So for me, it wasn't until, and it is a process, you know, and it happens in stages. I have this thing called the developing stairway, and it's a self-development model that suggests that when we're all on the ground floor, we can all see the same thing. We can all see the same thing. And then as you progress and climb the stairway, it's not that you're better than anyone else because you're higher than them or you're climbing the stairs. It's that you've got a different perspective. And this is the thing, as we develop ourselves, our perspectives change and we start asking different questions. But something else that also happens is that we start moving away for those people that don't want to climb the stairs. Yeah. It's okay that they don't want to climb the stairs. You might be really excited about what you're learning. They don't care. They're happy where they are. Yeah. Leave them there. And we spend all of our time going, come up here, instead of turning around and going, hey man, my name's Jonny, nice to meet you. Because there are people on the same step as you. You know, me and you are on a similar step, I'm sure, you know, and we get to know each other and it's all good. But instead I'm obsessing over the friend that just doesn't want to change. And who am I to be judgmental and say that they need to change? That's not the right way to do things, I don't think. I think everybody has to come to that understanding themselves if they ever do. And if they want to stay where they are, that's on them. That's great. Cool. Enjoy it.
I suppose one thing that's interesting that you've said there is the way I understand that is also a lot of people hang on to when you're talking about like people that you've been around not wanting to come up the stairs. People often try to hang on to the past and like almost hoping that a scenario that happened when they were younger it's going to happen again, whereas the trajectory is completely changed. I think because there's a level of guilt that comes with that because you're then like, oh, but it doesn't mean that I don't no longer like this person. It's just that the journeys are different. So it's just, as you say, it's managing your time with those individuals. Yeah. And also accepting that that's how you meet new people.
Oh, I think sometimes we misuse the word guilt. I think if we're really clear about what guilt means that you've done something wrong. Whereas actually, you know, let's take something like mum guilt, right? So your kid's got a sports day and you've got to work and you can't come and you say, I feel really guilty. No, you haven't done anything wrong. You're helpless. And it's that trying to find a more productive emotion, right? So it's like, I feel helpless. And by definition, there's nothing I can do. Don't like that. So what can I do instead? I can be guilty. Yeah, because if I'm guilty, I can start to blame myself because blame always feels productive. And we start to blame ourselves and we start to pile on the guilt, which makes us do things to make up for it and all of them different things, you know. Whereas actually, we just have to sit in that uncomfortable feeling of helplessness. And the better practice that we are, the quicker that process goes through, you know. And I think, who am I to tell anybody that they need to change? I think the big thing is that people try to process events and you can't process an event. You can understand an event, you can accept an event, but you can't really process it. What does that mean? Yeah. I think you have to understand what happened in order for it to not happen again. That will make you feel safe. And then you have to accept it, which is just do nothing. Stop reworking it in your head. Stop revisiting it. Stop wondering what if. And the way you do that is not by actively telling yourself to not do those things. It's by doing something else. What you struggle with most often is the imprint. Like I said, sometimes horrendous things. I've sat with people before and their child has died. You know, they've had a life-threatening illness. They've been sexually assaulted. They've lost their job and they're about to lose their home. Things happen to people and it's just so unbelievably bad that there aren't any words that are going to make it better. And in those moments, a significant emotion imprints on your life. And then every time you have an emotion anywhere near that, you become emotionally triggered and you spiral out of control using anxiety. So what do we have to get to understand is, okay, when this event happened, I felt this way. I felt scared, or I felt disappointed, or I felt inadequate, or I felt helpless. Okay. So now every time I feel anything like helplessness or anything like inadequacy or anything like disappointment, I have this extremely emotional response.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense to me. So what can we do about it? Well, in most cases, it's exposure therapy. And the way that we do that is by becoming aware. Okay, right now, I'm not angry. I'm feeling really helpless and there's nothing to do here.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do here, which is horrible. Like just doing nothing, like it's just horrible, like absolutely horrible. But it's that awareness. I've got this thing I call the 4 A's of behavioral change, which is awareness, accountability, acceptance, and action. You know, you can't do anything you're not aware about. Taking accountability for the things that you can influence. Yeah. It's empowering. If you're waiting for somebody else to do something because they should do it, you're right, they should do it, but they're not going to. So now what? You know, acceptance. The things you can't change, move on, accept it. And then action. Once you know what you're aware of, once you've taken accountability for what you can do and you've accepted what you can't, what's the actions you can take? You know, and once you move through that process, it's helpful.
Yeah, so true. I mean, it's what I always say about control your controllables. Like, if you can control it, control it. Other than that, there's no point in worrying about it. And one of the and I say that, and one of the statements I hate hearing from my mum is, worry about it when it happens. And you're like, but it's so true. It's so true.
Sorry,
like,
that's good.
Yeah.
It's what you don't want to hear. It's what you don't want to hear, but you're right. It's true. There's a saying I love, and it's the freedom you're looking for is found in the thing that you're avoiding. You want to do something, but you know you shouldn't, or there is nothing to be done. Your mum's a wise person.
On that note, like talking of mums, you're a dad yourself. When it comes to teaching kids, particularly about their emotions, how have you approached that as a dad? I mean, I'm not saying that you should therapize your children. What I'm saying is, like, particularly with the perspective that you've got, how have you then used that to support you with parenting? Because I think it's such an impactful thing. Because I always think now, particularly with myself and going through therapy, and obviously as well being quite an open and quite talkative person, you naturally get quite good at running through your emotions and understanding scenarios. It's then that skill that you can sort of pass down. And I wondered how you've used it in your parenting style.
I think just letting them have their emotions and showing them that all emotions are welcome. You know, one of the hardest things as a parent is, I think as most humans, but that urge to fix that you spoke about, that men tend to have more so than anything else. That urge to fix is so strong as a parent. When your kid is being bullied, or your kid's having a difficult time, or a kid's trying to accept a situation they don't want to accept, and you can feel that tears are in the room. As a man, as a father, I sit with my sons, and I let them know it's okay to cry. You know, I think that human beings are incredible. We have this inbuilt mechanism for dissipating emotion, and it's called crying. And we cry when we're sad. We cry when we're happy. We cry when we laugh. We cry a lot, you know, if we let ourselves. So it's there for a reason, you know, it's there for a reason. And otherwise, you know, you don't choose to cry. Crying happens. It's an inbuilt mechanism for dissipating emotion. So when my son is sat there and I can feel them tears, I put my arm around him, and he's thinking in his head, don't do that, Dad, because if you do that, I'll cry. And I want him to know that it's okay to do that. Yeah. That's exactly what you should do. This is a safe. Should you cry? There are certain people you probably shouldn't cry around. It's the truth. You know, you're talking about masculinity and toxic masculinity. Look, it's okay to cry. It's not okay to cry in front of everybody, because some people will take advantage of that. Yeah. You know, so actually, I want him to know that I'm your dad. I love you. I will do anything I can for you. I'm always batting for you. I'm always rooting for you. I'll always do what I can. Yeah. I want you to be better than sometimes you do, you know? Yeah. And I'm here right now. And right now, you need to cry. You need to have this emotion. And it's so interesting. You sit with someone, you let them cry their way for the length that they need to cry. in exactly say the things they want to say, and you don't interrupt the process. And guess what? They feel a bit better afterwards.
So interesting. I've never even thought about crying as like a emotional dissipation thing, because you're so right. It's our default to whenever someone's overwhelmed, whether it's happy, sad, anything.
Yeah.
The default is, it's.
Yeah. You see that person who's crying and they don't know why they're crying. Yeah.
And I think what you've said there's kind of what I think I'd strive to create is just that safe space to be like, look, whatever happens, happens. You just got to let it happen.
They're an 8-year-old. They're a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we have to give them permission. It's okay, son. Cry. Just cry.
Yeah.
Give them a cuddle. Let them do it. Just sit with them. Don't say a word. Don't try and fix it. Don't try and offer a different perspective. Don't try and say, well, at least this didn't happen. Don't do any of that. Just sit there and let them know, I know, son, it's not comfortable. It's sad. You want to cry. That's okay.
Yeah.
Cry.
Yeah.
That's the right thing to do.
100%. And I think it's as well, I think you hit the nail on the head there of we're trying to get kids to grow up too quickly. And I say that.
Oh, so true.
I say that with someone who did, not through any fault of their parents, of just my circumstance meant that I had to grow up quickly. But then also on the flip side of that, I was still able to be a kid, and I think there's so much power in that, particularly at the moment, of just let kids be kids. Like, I think we're expecting kids to be too perfect too soon. I mean, no one's perfect, but in terms of like, we're almost expecting them to turn into this perfect little adult. When actually you just got to let them. I mean, also you're forgetting the fact that you've just had 25 years on the planet to develop these skills. These guys have had like 8, and it's
exactly yeah. Yeah, and 2 of those they were in nappies. They weren't learning an awful lot other than
I mean,
their eyes.
It's so true, and I think emotion wise, there's so much that we just need to let kids be kids. With that of like, look, it's fine. Like, it's particularly because. Also, it comes back to a point I always reference of people only know the pain that they're exposed to. So if you play that with a kid if you play that with a kid, if they've not been exposed to that level of, and I say pain, there's like a generalization, I mean struggle, anything like that, it's what they've exposed to. So naturally, their tolerance is going to be a lot lower, which means they're going to hit that top end a lot quicker. And you've just got...
And that matters. Yeah. That matters. Yeah. That really matters. I remember watching a guy deal with his son. He was crying and he said, stop crying. You're crying like a girl, he was saying. And I was just like, oh man, you know what? You keep doing that to a little boy and then they get older and they can't dissipate them emotions through tears. So what happens? Yeah. What happens to it? Because it's not going anywhere. Emotions are energy in motion. And if they don't continue to move and flow, they get stuck. If they get stuck, they become stagnant. If they get stagnant, they become a problem really quickly.
Yeah.
So, you've got to let kids almost know more than we do in some ways. It's like when we instruct a kid with with our adult wisdom, basically we're teaching them all of the things that we've learned, all of our insecurities, all of our negative beliefs and limiting beliefs. We're teaching them that.
Yeah.
When actually they know what to do. They're looking over going, Dad, I feel like crying. And I'm like, don't cry. It's like, well, how's that helpful?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the best things I always say is kids are the best learners because they don't give a fuck. They're like, yeah, I'm going to go learn this thing or I'm going to go try this thing. Or like what I love as well is being a disabled person. Some of the things kids come out with, you're just like, bro, that is direct and I love it.
Yeah, straight. Yeah, and it's most often true. The kids will reflect back to you exactly how things are, and I go full circle. It's like when I used to be a PT, and I'd talk to these women that hated the way they looked. They hate themselves. At some point, they were a little kid, and they looked in the mirror, and they licked the mirror, and they looked in the mirror with curiosity and love. And they touched the mirror and they did all of these different things. And then over their life, they've learned to look in the mirror, grab parts of themselves and go, and judge themselves. And it's just like, that's learned. Kids don't do that. Doesn't matter what they look like. They don't look in the mirror and judge themselves. They look in the mirror with complete curiosity. And we lose that as we get older. We lose it. We lose it for lots of reasons. Some are valid. But I just try to keep the curiosity. I think staying a child is about remaining curious,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also think it's a lot about how what you're saying is making them feel. So when you tell a kid not to cry, it's not about them crying, it's about how their crying makes you feel. When you cry, I feel uncomfortable, stop it. That's basically what they're saying. So when somebody says to you, hey, you're going to change careers, why would you do that? They're pushing their fears on you by saying, I would never do something like that. So please don't you do it, because then what does that mean about me if you do that and I don't? You know, this is what happens. We project our fears onto people, and you can always tell because people become very passionate and single-minded about their opinion. It's like, no, you shouldn't do that, and they kind of double down when they're doing it. It's like, no, seriously, you're not listening to me. It's like, I am listening. I just don't want to do what you want me to do. you know. So,
and I think a lot of that comes from as an adult, you're often told to, in many shapes and forms, to stay in your lane. So and what I mean by that is like, if you work in finance, you stay in finance. If you're a developmental coach, you stay in that lane. Or if you're, and I think the worst thing is there's a big part of that comes with being an adult of like, you have more responsibilities and it's harder to take risks. So I get that. But then also it's that whole thing of, I just wish we'd allow people, and that comes to society as a whole, to just, if you want to change something, just do it. Because I think a lot of the reasons we don't do it is because of the way society conditions us to go, but if you, like, let's take the example of changing jobs. Right, I've decided I don't like my job anymore. I'm going to go change my job. Okay, so your brain automatically starts going, but where's my income going to come from? If I quit now, how am I going to get a good reference? How long is it going to take me? Yeah, it's just allow people to go, do you know what? I made a change. I wasn't happy. Cool. And I'm not saying like you need to be happy all the time, but I think we just need to allow people to feel what they feel. But then also part of that, I think, is just if they want to do something different or change the way they live or anything, just allow them to do it and allow them to kind of figure it out. I think as adults we don't give people enough space to figure stuff out because there's like pressure, and I think that does it's often what I talk about as living in the UK. That's very much our culture. It's very much now you need to be on the go, and I think there's so much of that we need to take from other countries that have got very different approaches. And lastly, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something that's coming up. As we record, we're in the middle of December, and one of the big parts that will come with that is the people going into dry January. And as someone that struggled with addiction when it comes to alcohol, what was your journey, one, like with the journey of sobriety, and also, I think a lot of the time, it feels like dry January is almost like a tokenism thing. It's almost like, I'm going to do this because it's a good deed. And like, I think there's so much, I mean, I've had so many experts on about sobriety, and I think there's so many people leaning in that direction. So I wanted to get your perspective on your journey with it and what you think about the way the society's leaning more into sobriety.
I mean, the first thing I'll say is that I'm not a sobriety expert. I only talk about my experience with it and the experiences that I've learned from through my clients, which I'm not going to downplay is significant. I've learned a lot about it, but I think it depends on the person. You know, for some people, dry January is an opportunity. It's an opportunity at its very base level. They've overindulged in December, and it's an opportunity to take a bit of a break and let the liver recover and all those different things. But for other people, you know, it's an opportunity to see if they can do it. And if they can't do it, what does that mean? You know, I think maybe what you're ultimately asking is, how do you know when it's time to become sober? Well, I think when you're asking that question, you know, I think if you're asking yourself that question, there's something there to explore. You know, can you choose not to drink? When you go out with your friends, can you say, I'm going to drive tonight, or don't fancy a drink? If you can't do that, then potentially there's a problem. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know your life or whoever we'd be talking about. But I think I learned that my experience with alcohol, and this is my experience, but I think it is a lot of others, is I was unable or unwilling to regulate my emotions, to sit with my emotions, to understand my emotions, to even listen to my emotions. And when I drank alcohol, that helped. It helped me regulate my emotions. I outsourced my emotional regulation to alcohol, and it helped. It helped take away whatever feeling I was having. It helped me feel like I was getting sleep. It helped me manage my emotions. The problem with alcohol for me was it was like that person that gave me a nice big warm hug while stealing my wallet out of my back pocket. It's just like it wasn't really working, you know. It was just my way of dealing with things. And
I mean, that could be an analogy for alcohol, full stop, anyway.
oh yeah, and that's why I made the documentary, because I don't want my life to be defined by being sober. You know, I don't want to go on podcasts for the rest of my life talking about sobriety. That doesn't sound much fun. When I made that film, to me, I was closing the loop on that whole scenario, that whole going sober. It was part of my story. It wasn't my story. But what I wanted people to understand is when they watch that film, they will experience very challenging emotions through that. And they will want to think it's about what's happening for me. And maybe in part it is. But actually, those emotions are coming up for a reason. And what is that reason? What do those emotions mean about you? What are you ignoring in your life? What do you need to change? Now, addiction isn't just alcohol. Addiction is an affair. Addiction is drugs. Addiction is smoking. Addiction is chocolate. You know, there's lots of ways to get addicted. And what we are doing is we are using something to avoid something else. And the bit that people don't talk about is that it works. It's just not a very good method.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing as well is this again is an assumption, is people get scared of the label. So like, for example, if someone comes up to me and goes, "Oh, I'm sober," people I think assume that, "Oh, you must have been an alcoholic then." No, that's not how that works. It could be just the fact that they've decided, do you know what, alcohol wasn't doing it for me, and so I just stopped. And I think that's something else that I wish people would lean into more. Like, why do we keep having to label stuff? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm also that guy that will bat to the hills of like, labels also help people understand things, but why do we always have to be in a camp or out of a camp? Why do I have to be sober or not sober? Why do I have to be vegetarian or not vegetarian? Just let people do as they do. Like, if they don't drink, they don't drink. If they do drink, they do drink. If they it's this, because with a label comes stigma in a lot of people's minds. And I think that's also the big battle for anyone struggling with addiction is, one, there's the acceptance they've got to go through themselves, but then also there's the label that comes with it. And then that's, as you say, it's almost something that you carry through with you. Like, yeah.
But you can choose not to do it. I mean, label, I think you said it like very articulately, you know, labels are helpful for understanding, but they mustn't define us. They mustn't become our glass ceiling. They mustn't become our limitations. You know, once I found out I was dyslexic, I found out I had to learn differently. That was all. It wasn't that I couldn't learn. I couldn't read. I couldn't do these things. It's that I just learned a little bit differently. And once I learned how that was, I was away, and I've read every book that I wanted to read, and we were off. You know, so, you know, I had a problematic relationship with alcohol. That's how I define it. You know, like alcohol wasn't a problem till it was. And the problem was I surrounded myself with people who were very similar to me. So it didn't feel like a problem because everyone was drinking the same way I was, you know. But here's the distinguishing part. What matters most is it a problem to you?
Yeah.
Your friends might be drinking the same amount as you. Your parents might be drinking the same amount as you. Okay, fine. How are they about it? They don't care. Okay, well, if they don't care and you do, then that matters. You know, that matters.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and to give a really weird example, like, it's the way of looking at, like, also it's just what people care about. Like, if you take, for example, this pod, some people that I create, that know me, that I created, they're probably thinking, well, why the hell do you do that. It's because I care about it. Same thing comes with, if you feel that you need to make the change, make the change. You don't have to seek anyone's like approval to do it. If it's gonna benefit you, go for it. And I think the quicker we get away from a society of judging someone for changing a behaviour, I still love the analogy that one of my friends said to me once. He said, if alcohol went onto Dragon's Den, would not get any investment whatsoever. Can you imagine going?
That's an interesting point. I like that.
We've got this thing, right? It's gonna make you act really silly. It's also gonna make you feel like crap, and it's also gonna be really expensive, and it's also gonna be poison you. What do you reckon? It's like
that's a really good point. I like that. That's interesting. Yeah,
it's so true. And then lastly is the question that I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
I'm trying to think which it is. I'll tell it in a story. I was on the side of the rugby pitch once, and I was watching my son play rugby, and there was a mid-60s, late 60s white guy standing on the side of the pitch talking really loudly to his friend. I live in Cornwall, predominantly white place. You know, there's not many people of colour down here. And this guy shouts out, I was talking to this coloured fella yesterday. And there was this audible gasp from everyone who was standing on the sidelines. And they all sort of looked at me, and I couldn't really be bothered with it all, so I just carried on watching the game and tried not to draw any attention to it. And then I was in the clubhouse afterwards, and this little white lady walks up to me and says, Jonny, I'm so sorry. And I genuinely and honestly didn't know what she was talking about. And I went, for what? And she went, that guy on the sidelines, he said, and she sort of looked around and she went, he said coloured. And I was just like, oh, okay, right, yeah. And I pointed this out to her. I said, listen, how old do you think he is? She said, maybe late 60s. I said, look, when he was my age, that was probably the right thing to say. And I think people may or may not need to change, but we also have to be patient while they change. We have to be patient. We have to let them catch up. If you've been practicing a behavior for 50 years, you're not going to change overnight. And demonizing people and telling them off and shouting at them, calling them racist and all of these things whilst they're learning to change, that's not fair, I don't think. So
yeah 100%. I completely agree that, because I think it's that whole thing of, like I've mentioned a couple of times, of allowing people the chance to make mistakes, and also allowing them to learn, of like you say, if you're so used to calling using a term like, a thing that I actually spoke about on another podcast is, one of the things I've struggled with is, one of my friends is now gender neutral, and I've known them as a male for years, so even my default is, it's he, and it's really hard for me to wrap my head around it. But also the dyslexia comes in for me as well, of going, that my brain just can't wrap my head around it. But then it's that whole thing of allowing them to make the mistake, because, as I've often said, you can see the intent behind it. So again, to use another more sort of towards me analogy of, like, if someone uses the wrong, like, one of the ones that's quite weird to hear in the UK is handicap. And someone uses that term, and you're like, okay, wow, okay, this is gonna be a fun one.
Mine's half caste. I don't like half caste. I don't like that word. That's not one I like.
It's interesting, but then you also have to accept that that's the language that some people know, and it's about, again, opening that communication of going.
We're allowed to feel comfortable with it, but we also have to accept that they're in the process of changing. And I think what you said was perfectly put. It's about intent. If you intend to offend me, it has worked. If you don't, then obviously I'm going to be open to helping you understand and change your mind,
I say intent's massive as well, because then you can see where it was coming from, because you can also see oftentimes, particularly in my context, you can see the panic in people's face because they go, what terminology do I use?
And you just want to take it away from them and go, look, it's fine.
And it's, as you say, giving people the space to learn and space to make mistakes. And also it's hard, because I think there's an argument to people say, Charlie, you shouldn't always say about picking your battles. But then I'm also like, as well as that, there's also the mental toll it takes on the individual that's correcting, let's say, and you go, do you know what? It's not going to massively affect the situation. I might leave that one, or I might not have the conversation, and then
It's about choosing to be kind, man. It's about choosing to be kind. Imagine you were trying to learn another language.
Yep.
Imagine you
Yep.
you moved to France next week and you were learning France, and every time learning French, and every time you spoke French wrong, people shouted at you. You'd just give up. Like you'd become a mute. you wouldn't want to speak because every time you speak, you do something wrong. So it's like it's just about being patient and helping them go. 100%. No, we don't say it this way. We say it that way.
Great.
You know, that's how you do it if you were learning to speak French.
Like, learning a different language. You're completely right, because particularly with society at the moment, when you talk about the disability community, it's a minefield even for me, and I'm in it, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, guys, like, why are there so many names for all these different things? And as an outsider looking in, you must be thinking, fucking hell, guys, which one do I use? Like,
yeah, and there's so many different scenarios where we can get things wrong, as you say, with gender and sexuality and race and religion and political views, and there's so many different, you know, like when Trump came in, you know, it's a difficult topic to talk about. It was, you know, people didn't want to talk about it. I'm more like I'll explore a situation without attaching too much emotion to it. I won't like hedge my bets any one way. I want to understand things from a broader perspective, not from a bias, you know. And I think sometimes people don't do that.
Yeah, there's often a lot of passion behind it, but that's also why we started the pod initially. My whole thing was started with the fact of talking about disability in a way that was an approachable conversation, so that people could learn something, and then I wanted to branch out and learn something from other people within the community, because that was how we could actually get a better understanding of everyone's perspective and everyone's world, because if you keep it all within this little cellular bubble, no one learns anything. The analogy I often use is, it's like two guys in wheelchairs shouting, "We need more ramps." Yeah, I know, Darren. What's like, no shit, Sherlock. And this is how we make real change, is having those conversations and learning from each other and learning different ways of dealing with things. And I think, as I say, it's just compassion, such a powerful thing, and I think it's a skill that we underuse at the moment.
I think that is you've hit the nail on the head. I think if we sprinkled more compassion around, if people really tried to understand what it's like to be that person. Look, so there are so many well-meaning causes. So, you know, if I was in government, there's so many different ways that we could spend money, but it's about really trying to understand what happens when you take away the fuel allowance for the winter, really trying to understand what impact that's going to have. You know, when you hit the farmers' families with the inheritance tax, when you do that, what impact does it have? I'm not saying either's right or wrong. I'm just saying let's explore it. Let's explore the impact that it has, not the blame. The blame won't get you anywhere. Let's talk about the impact it's going to have and try and understand it. Try and walk a mile in their shoes and see what it feels like, and see if do you really want that many people also, feeling that way?
It's real.
What's that going to do?
Real.
You know?
It's real, and it's fact as well. And I think, I mean, we're going to go around in circles, but I completely agree. It's so important that we're just more compassionate with people. But thank you so much for coming on, Jonny. It's been a great conversation. I've loved this. Yeah, it was great. Absolutely great.
I thoroughly loved it. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your laughter. It's been great. Thank you.
Oh, completely to you as well. And of course, guys, we'll link all of Jonny's details below, as well as the documentary he's worked on as well. And if you do want to reach out to him, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer any questions.